Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this new edition of True Crime with the Sarge. I'm your host, Joseph Giacalone, and tonight we have former journalist for the Long Island Press, Jaclyn Galluci, who was one of the premier writers out at Long Island at the time when the Long Island serial killer case was going on, and some of her articles were the seminal articles on the victims themselves, and some of them entitled "Lost Girls: When Women Disappear, Some Matter, Prostitutes Don't." That was actually a really big one. We're gonna get into it tonight. Jaclyn, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming
Yeah.
on.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, Jacqueline, I'm glad that we finally got a chance to speak again and you come to do the show because I looked at you as one of the first advocates for the victims of at the then time we didn't know just the Long Island serial killer, Gilgo killer, whatever they were calling him back then in 2011. It was you and the Long Island Press that was really pushing these stories out there.
Yeah, I feel like our team and our publisher Jed, they really helped move that case because a lot of writers, I could only do so much. A lot of people wouldn't let you write those stories, and a lot of people don't want to write a story about a missing sex worker, put them on the cover, and they did. So I always appreciated that.
Well, and you guys are actually, like I said, were very progressive with this case. You had Shannon Gilbert on the power list, right?
Yes.
Because you did. Tell us a little bit about that. How did you choose Shannon Gilbert for that power list at the time?
We always have these meetings and we would talk about who are the most powerful people on Long Island. And someone said, well, you know, there's a serial killer out there, but we're not going to put a serial killer on the list because, that person's just a coward in my book. But we thought, without Shannon Gilbert's case, all of these cases, all these other women's cases would never have been brought to light. They would have never been found. Some of them were reported missing. So she really opened the door for all of this. Whether she's part of the Gilgo case, that doesn't matter. She opened the door for all of this. So there's nothing more powerful than that. She basically, you know, pretty much got a serial killer arrested. So
Right. And I also love too that you've been on a number of the documentaries. I know you were in the Netflix one and you were in a couple others, talking about this because like I said, you were an advocate for these women. Rarely do we find media outlets talking about the victims themselves, but the Long Island Press was really front and center during this whole time.
yeah, it was a local story. We all lived on Long Island. I still live on Long Island, and it was just like someone local went missing. Megan Waterman was the first person that I had heard of before Shannon Gilbert, and her family came here and were putting up missing posters, missing persons flyers in Hop Hog, right in Smithtown, and this is like a neighbor. It's this stuff doesn't happen here, so
Yeah, you had in your articles, Megan Mortimer was the central focus on a lot of that, and for obvious reasons, because it was the one where they actually had some video surveillance of her. Talk to us a little bit about Megan Mortimer and how this whole case, came about.
So I didn't really hear much. I think there was a police blotter item in one of the papers that someone was arrested for sex work, and that ended up being Megan. But later, before I knew who she was, a few months later, there was something that a woman going missing in Hop Hog, and I never heard of that. And I don't know how you can live in a small area and not know these things, and where newspapers and the news they're not covering these things, but people don't panic when a sex worker goes missing. They think they live that kind of lifestyle. They might disappear for a few days and show up. So when I saw the flyers at like the local ShopRite and the mall, I'm like, who is it? What's happening? And I was already writing about other like unidentified murder victims on Long Island. And I'm like, this is a missing person. She could be alive for all we know. And like, why is nobody talking about this? And so that was just shocking. So that's really where everything started. It was like, let's tell people like this is somebody that disappeared right down the block, like in our neighborhood.
Right. So at the time, the Long Island Press, like I said, they covered the story pretty exclusively, and Newsday is the largest newspaper out on Long Island. The Long Island Press kind of made its mark, I thought, with the this case. I mean, especially with the cover of the Lost Girls with the hand over the woman's mouth, which I used for the thumbnail for this show, where you had your article was the front cover of the newspaper that time.
Yeah, I mean, it was to be allowed to do that again is just like it's really unheard of, and to be able to follow a story as long as that's the great thing about an alternative news weekly. You don't have to follow the daily rules. You don't have to make room for all the other news. Like this was an important story, and we were going to tell it like from beginning to end and stick with it. And it was wonderful to have the freedom to actually be able to do that.
Yes, and like I said. when you approach, how does it work for a journalist? Like, so you have like a story idea, and then you approach, was it your editor, and say, "This is what I got," and then he or she's going to decide if this is going to go forward or not.
Yeah, we talked to like we're a small group, we were a small group, and um, we would always have like just pitch meetings, and we just discussed it, and this was something like again we're going through like missing women, and just we always looked for the story that people weren't telling, and it was just an important story, and everyone was on board with it, and then we got the final approval was like, what, put it on the cover, and like that was just shocking and amazing because you wouldn't get a cover page for a story like this, especially without such little information at the time. She could have
Right.
just ran off, who knows? We didn't know it was a serial killer. If it was a serial killer, everyone wants to cover like a story like that, but people don't really pay attention to the small like police blotter items.
Right. Even like 13 years ago, social media still wasn't what it is
Yes,
today.
yes.
So people were still reading newspapers back then, including myself. I still like reading a newspaper every now and then, but
Me too.
I can't
Definitely.
I'm too old for that. I can't get away with reading it on paper. But anyway, what I found really interesting, well, the press, when you're covering these articles, is that we get to know who the victims were. And you can even sense a little bit of anger in your stories when you wrote them, by like, why don't these women get the attention that they need?
Yeah. And it's hard because you want to make them as human as possible because people can relate to the next door neighbor, the teacher, the mother of three next door. So it's hard to get people to relate to people when you don't have a lot of information about them. Like Jessica Taylor at the time, I couldn't find family members. It's just hard to track people down when they're like estranged sometimes from their family, and it's hard to. So any little details we can get about them, other than how they were killed, we try to really put out there.
Yep, my friend Kathy Ryan just showed up there. She used to be
Oh,
working for Suffolk County. Kathy, good to see you. All of the different aspects of this case, now that we're looking back, 12 or 13 years later, when you were going through your notes, right? Because just like detectives, you have notes that never make it into a story, just like the detectives have notes that never make it into a case. Was there anything that in your notes that you said that, you look back on 13 years later after the arrest was made, and you say, wow, I had this where, and they dropped this from the, from the story. Was there anything like that?
not so much that was dropped. I feel like things got a little crazy after Dormer left, Richard Dormer, the
Yeah.
former police commissioner, and he had said there was a single killer,
Yes.
and when he got kind of pushed out, all of a sudden it was like no, Spoda was like there's multiple killers, it's all these things, and at the time like he was saying there's different MOs between the Manorville homicides and the Ocean Parkway homicides because some of the bodies were mutilated, other ones were intact. And it's just, these are things that we were like, why does that matter? MOs evolve. Like, why is this a thing? Like, and Dormer was on that path and he was pushed out. And it's just, that's such a shame because I feel like that's when the FBI left. That's when things just got
Yeah,
off
things
course.
got crazy. And
Very
actually,
crazy.
I liked Richard Dormer. He was an old school cop, the Irish brogue and everything. But I tell you, I gave the guy credit for publicly saying that we might have a serial killer. And when he
Yeah.
said that, and I was watching on the news, I almost fell off the chair because cops generally stay away from that term.
I could still hear his voice, and I think this is one of the main things that I would say that didn't really make it into a story is that I saw Richard Dormer at one of the press conferences after the cameras were being put away and everyone was packing up to go home, and he went up to the victims' families that were there, and he looked them in the eye and he said, I promise you, we're going to work on this. Like we are going to. I'm going to do everything I can. And he meant it, like I actually felt like he cared and he had empathy. And I think things would have, I feel like they made him the fall guy for things. Like they tried to say, oh, no, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And I just felt like he cared. Like he was wanted to speak with sex workers. He said, call me. I don't care what you're doing. You will not get in trouble. I just want to solve this case. But when Burke came in and Spoda, that was off the table. So it's such a shame that that happened.
Yeah, no, and actually, in your article is one of, because I took some copious amount of notes on your stuff. So just know that and actually, Nightbot is sharing your link. So if anybody wants to read these stories, make sure you go over to Jacqueline's official website and click on her. It's under clips, and you can read all her articles dating back, over a decade now. Some of these. One of the other things that you had in your article, which I found, yeah, pretty interesting, was that you actually had Dormer quoted in there saying, it doesn't matter what these girls did for a living, basically, they deserve to have, and he seemed to be like the only one that, in the official capacity. I mean, listen, we know, we heard the complaints about the police department about how they treated these victims and their families. Walk a little bit about that, because you had a little bit of the backstory there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in the beginning that the police couldn't talk about, so people were already suspicious. And but I understand that, like, you can't show all your cards, you can't like talk about things and make everything public. So I think people take silence as like they're doing nothing,
Mhm.
and I think that's when people started bragging on the police. And when Dormer was in charge, and he was doing a lot more than Burke, because Burke was trying to cover himself. And when you have people who are doing illegal things and also you know have been with sex workers and doing things that are illegal, he doesn't want to get caught, so he has every reason to not help this investigation, and every reason to push the FBI out. And if the FBI would have stayed in, look how much got done when they came back in. Like, that's why we're here now, like, because all the agencies got together, NYPD, SCPD, Nassau County, everybody. And Burke prevented that.
when uh when you were writing for the press, and the victims were starting to be found, when you had Megan Waterman, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Amber Lynn Costello, and Melissa Bartholomew, what was one of your first reactions when when this kind of broke, put the news kind of thing?
So I still I remember it like yesterday, because I was working a weekend shift, and it was a Saturday, and we just covered, anything that happened on the weekend. And there's not much happening on Long Island on the weekend other than like fairs and festivals and things like that. And there was something about that the police found bones, which usually is, animal bones, especially by the beach. And
Yeah.
it was in the back of my head. We put it in as like a quick little write up. There's nothing to say. But Monday, when I got to work, at the end of the day, they shut down Ocean Parkway. And I heard that on like 1010 Winds. They were like, the parkways are shut down, like maybe due to an accident or whatever. But as soon as I heard that, I was like, oh my God, this is the spot where those, so I'm like, maybe, because I was writing about Megan at the time. And I was like, please don't let it be, her. And I went down there and I saw the roads closed, and it was snowing and like just flurrying. And one of the like the big SUV backed up, and they had like the headlights facing into the brush. And a cop knocked on my window and just said, "You got to get out of here," because I shut off all my lights. It was dark because it was winter, and I thought I could, But I'm like, something's going on here. This is not just, this isn't a deer. This isn't anything like that. And then I really just felt sick at that point, because I'm like, I hope it's not like, because at that point we thought Megan was like trafficked maybe, or just missing, and I never really thought it was her at that point. And when they said they found bones and human bones, and then they went back and they found another set and another set and another set, and we found about Shannon Gilbert, and then none of these were ever Shannon Gilbert. We get press releases every day. We're searching this area from here to here. We'll be done at 3 o'clock. The next morning, this is what we found. We're at the end of the day. This is what we found. And at the end would always be, these remains were determined not to be those of Shannon Gilbert. So it was just like this crazy, like, how is this happening? Like, this is
Yeah.
just, you can't make this up. Like, it's terrible.
Right. So it says, I'm loving this guest, Jaclyn. You are so intelligent and caring. I love it. Thank you for your
Thank you
work you
very
did
much.
on this. So I wanted to make sure you saw that one. I
Thank
thought
you
that was
very
a great
much.
comment. And KLB says, I didn't know you could push the FBI out. Yes, KLB, they have to be invited into an investigation unless there's a federal nexus. It was a quiz question, and some of you guys are falling behind on those. So make sure you go back and do your quizzes. Uh, you also had mentioned there was you were doing research into other missing and unidentified human remains, and that's when you came across the Megan, wanted information poster and stuff like that. But there was a couple other cases. I know you mentioned Jennifer, is it Papane? But
Yes.
that case, but was solved. But there was another one, Gail Belfield from 1995. She was from Wyandanch. So there are still a number of cases. When you were, going through this, were you a one serial killer's thought in process, or you thought there was multiple people? Were you on the Dormer camp or the Spoda camp?
I was in the Dormer camp once the Gilgo 4 were all found. But
Mhm.
before that, when I was just looking at these cases, I was just like, wow, there's a lot going on, like that I did not know about. Because a lot of these were before like my time even. Some of these go back to like when I was in elementary school. And there's one story of this one case of Tanya Rush, and she was found
Mhm.
off the Southern State Parkway on New Bridge Road in a suitcase. And her cases are very similar. Her case is very similar to Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack, and that has never been solved. And there's a memorial on the Parkway still where she was found. And there's just a lot of these single cases. And then Peaches, when she was Peaches, before we knew her name, that was in, you know, 1997. And there's just all these scattered things. So you don't think all these things that are so far apart, um, that they're related until
Right.
there was the 4 victims. And it's like, okay, well, could this be related to Jessica Taylor? Because I was writing about Jessica Taylor too at that point, but never considering that her case had anything to do with Megan.
Right. I mean, what we know now, right? We can look back on some of these things and say, like, wow, there's connections here, connections there. But when this was all happening, everybody's, yes, there were sex workers, but on Long Island, there were some panicked people too when they started hearing about all these cases, and the numbers started going up because, at certain points, we know that the internet and Craigslist played a big role in this. Was there any talk about these internet sites besides what you guys were reporting at the time? Like, did you guys know these things existed, or this is just one of those kind of things like, holy cow, this stuff is going on?
We knew there was like, people used to joke around about like misconnections or something, or like there was like, I never thought people were really,
Doing
I
this,
didn't know
yeah,
people were doing this. And I didn't realize that like there was this whole dangerous world that was real out there. It's just, it was really surprising when we discovered all of this, and like with Backpage and everything,
yeah,
and how easy it would be. And because you think you're safer when you're not walking the street. Think on the street in the dark alley, you might not be safe, but online you have control. And for this person to reach out to all of these people online, and it's like almost like you know them a little better. You've talked to them
yeah.
before, and I think it maybe gives a false sense of security. But
The internet has definitely made this from overt, where women were walking the streets, to covert, where and I think it was a lesson or a wake up call for a lot of people when this case broke and this news broke about how these girls were, using the internet to find these Johns, and making these deals, and how dangerous that is. Even more dangerous when you think about it than getting picked up on the street. And
yes,
it's crazy, how this thing. Flynn Brown's got a great question. He says, after Liz contacted Melissa's sister, did you ever wonder if he'd try to contact you as a member of the press?
you know what? We got a lot of messages and emails and handwritten letters, which is actually even crazy for that time. Um, I don't know. I turned everything over to the police. I always put them in plastic bags and handed them over because I didn't know. I mean, most likely it was people just, you know, a feud with their neighbor. Like someone said, look into this person. His last name begins with this letter. His license plate has these 3 letters. So we did get a lot of those things, but I never considered he'd even know who I was. It's actually pretty shocking. Like I didn't think anything like he would be reading my articles or anything like that. And the funny thing is like my colleague had written an article and it was listed in the discovery, that Rex Heuermann was reading that article. So it's just like, whoa. That was
Well,
a
and
little shocking this many
and we
years
only
later.
know, yeah, we only know this much. That was, of course, the defense has all that stuff, but they only released the stuff that they wanted to release. Those articles could be in there because he collected an awful lot of information.
Yeah, it's shocking. Like it's shocking now. Like this is going like about 15 years ago, and it's just like at the time never considered it. Never considered like anybody would reach out, other than maybe somebody just you know saying suspecting somebody they knew. But
Well, one of the facts that you had on your one of your articles, I can't remember exactly which one it was, but I was actually pretty shocked when I found out that Craigslist was making $45 million a year, a third of their revenue, for the sex work, just the sex work part.
crazy. And even the print, like the Village Voice back then, and a lot of the papers, that advertising brought in a ton of money. And it's a big business, and it's hard to shut things down when people are making money off of them.
But they did do the right thing, right? They
Yes.
ended up, yeah, they ended up doing the right thing. Craigslist started donating the money to groups, right, to help
Yes.
wayward girls, so to speak, and try to get people back on track. So they did the right thing in regards to that. Gonna throw this question out to you. When you heard the news that they arrested Rex Sherman for the serial killer, what was the first thing that came to your mind? Where were you? What were you doing?
Oh,
And how did it make you feel?
this is, I will say, this is one of the best moments of my life. And I don't know if that's a good thing or pathetic, but
No.
that was one of the happiest moments of my life. I was taking a family trip to Alaska actually, and I was getting on a plane and I saw people started texting me and I started seeing like possible arrests in the Gilgo case, and I was just like literally jumping. Like this case means a lot. Like, I mean, this is something I have obsessed over and like has bothered me on so many levels and kept me up at night because like I can't even imagine like what these families are going through. And like for this to actually maybe have some type of becoming to some type of justice and end was just absolutely incredible. And then when the press conference came on, I was on the plane and I was streaming it. My friend actually downloaded it because I couldn't get it. And I was playing it and I saw Megan's daughter there, all grown up. And she was a little girl back when I interviewed their family. And like all these women are like the families are all getting, you know, they're going to have answers. And it's like something that you almost think might never be solved. And it was amazing seeing them all up there so many years later. And so many people have been lost since, like, Megan's mom passed away, Mary Gilbert. And it's just, I mean, I know they're seeing it somewhere, but like, it's just a shame that they could not be here because they, really spoke for their kids.
Yeah, no, I mean, even I had gotten to the point where I had given up hope that they were even going to solve this case. I mean, when you're
Yeah.
looking at 12 years or so, and you get it's like this case, it was a mess. I mean, it was an absolute mess. And then all of a sudden, everything changed. Now, I think you had moved on from the Long Island Press at that time. By the time this was
Yes.
right, so you had moved on. But when they brought in the task force and things, and I knew Rodney Harrison for a long time, and I'm like, if anybody's going to turn this around, it would be Rodney. He's
Amazing.
coming. Yeah, he came. Listen, I worked with the man for a couple of years. We were sergeants together in the 7-3 precinct
Oh,
in Brownsville way back when. That's how long. That's how long we go back. We go back to like 1999.
nice.
So, but yeah, so I was excited for him. And he came on there first day, said he's going to solve this case. You
Amazing.
know, and it
That was
took
that
about
was the
putting
other thing. Oh, sorry.
yeah, no, tell me. Yeah, because
That
people
was
are
the
here to
other
see
thing.
you, not me.
No, I was so impressed when they started with the press conference going through the cell phone data and everything and all like not even this was before they even released all of the information like the text of everything. But when they were talking at the press conference about the cell phone, what they did, how they followed him and everything, I'm like, yes, they were following this like, like they were working behind the scenes. We didn't hear about it, but it took a while. It took a new leadership, but like they cared, like people were working on this, and that just made me so happy. Like I love the world in that moment. Like it's a horrible story and it's terrible and it makes me incredibly upset. But like that was like the little bit of a like good to come out of this is like there
Yeah.
were good people. Like
I mean, think about the stars that get aligned for this, right? That's why I always,
yes,
I don't believe in coincidences, right? So you have an election, you get a new district attorney, they go outside and they pick Rodney Harrison to be the police commissioner. You have Ed Toulon Jr., who takes over the prison system out there. These three guys really come together and really put this thing, put it together. I mean, they did an unbelievable job in such a short time.
so yeah, and there's just so much, just the surveillance, the like all the, I know they're arguing over DNA in court, but there's just so much more than that.
Okay, Mary's got a question here. It says, between law enforcement and the journalists, how many suspected serial killers are in the U.S.? I can answer this one. They anywhere they could say we've seen numbers anywhere from 1 to 2,000 we can have
Oh, jeez.
operating in the United States. Unfortunately, we have so many unsolved cases every year that go on and leave this. If you want to do some more research on that, Mary, I would tell you to head over to the Murder Accountability Project because they have a bunch of research on that. And full disclosure, I am a board member of the Murder Accountability Project. So just for those out there, but there's a lot of stuff up there that you can read about it. Uh, are you still in contact with any of the family members? Like after this arrest was made, did you talk to anybody?
Some Facebook messages and stuff.
Okay.
Like
Yeah,
I
you don't
don't
have to
like.
mention names. Yeah,
Yeah.
you don't have to mention names, but and the feeling was like kind of joy for them at this point.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine. And and from your position as a journalist, I mean, you were on the ground, you were talking to all these families, you were vested into it. So, to think about that you were going to be just as excited to hear this news as they were is actually kind of cool when you think about it.
It was nice to see how many people are excited about it. Like, again, nothing, not a cause for celebration, but just that so many people were like, finally, like there's justice, and it just made me feel good that that many people cared. In that moment, like so many people were just like, thank God this happened.
Yeah, no, I mean, for Long Islanders, this was like, this was a big moment because, like I said, a lot of people, including myself, had given up.
Yeah,
And just kind of thought about it. And you know what? Eventually, too, people were going to forget about these victims. And then
exactly.
we start, and then as the months go on, right, the year goes on, we start getting more victims. What were you thinking then when they started finding, besides the Gilgo four, and they started going out there, and all of a sudden now we're finding all these other remains and connecting them to Manorville and everything else that goes along with it.
It was sick because it would be literally getting into work, and the press releases would come out, or usually around like 9 o'clock, 9:05, and it was just like you were waiting for it to come through, and they'd be like, "Oh, we found a tooth, we found a bone, we found this," and it's like these are people, and like you're finding, you don't know if this is all one person, if it's different people. There's a skull, there's a bone here, and it's just like this sounds like a TV show. This doesn't sound like real life, and it's just really sickening, especially when these are areas you're so familiar with. Like these are places. This I spent my summers there as a teenager. Like I was on Ocean Parkway all the
Yeah.
time at Jones Beach. And Rex Hewerman worked at Jones Beach, which is, as my friends worked at Jones Beach. That's why I was always there as a teenager. And it's just not at the same time, but like this is a neighbor. This is somebody I was probably on the train with at some point. It's just
Yeah, and
really.
And actually, one of your articles too, you actually put out a better profile than some of the experts had put out. About the person lives, on Long
Oh,
Island, commutes to Manhattan. I mean, you had it
you
pretty
would
much,
think that would be like,
but it was
that's
pretty close.
it's just like that's like the worst case, and like it's just somebody, somebody that you think is just the person you're sitting next to on the train, and that's usually what it is because these people
And
blend in.
technically, yeah, we're starting to see videos. Did you see that video recently from the New York Post? Put out this woman who took a video of Rex,
Oh,
right.
yes,
I wonder
yes.
how many more videos are like that out there. That was another complete surprise.
Yeah, there's people coming forward saying that they had encounters with him, and I haven't talked to any of them, but like I've definitely heard that people have. I mean, I would say he's an unforgettable character. Just the fact that you know with Amber Lynn Costello, like like this man who's ogre like and over 240 pounds and 6'4" in this car, this big truck was witnessed, like that's a pretty good description, and we don't find out until after this that they had a car, that a make and model, that they were like a Chevy Avalanche, and that a dark truck was seen backing in to the same area where Jessica Taylor was found.
Yeah, Manorville. Yeah, that
That's
was actually.
crazy. Like we didn't know
Yep.
Megan's phone was in Massapequa. Like there's so many things. Like there was a description, and it's just if the FBI was not kicked out, if these people weren't all pushed away and everyone just worked together like they did now. Like I just think this could have happened a lot sooner.
They had everything there. But like you had mentioned before, we just talked about this in passing, but Burke comes in, the whole thing gets turned
Yeah.
upside down, and it really turned things crazy. Jenny G says, I saw Bob Seger at Jones Beach in 2019 for his final tour. I totally looked back through the pics on the Long Island Railroad when I was down there. Didn't see him. I took I took the Babylon train. I lived in Wantor at the time. My wife and I, we had an apartment in Wantor. Right. We had the Long Island Railroad would drive right through our backyard, and I took that same train that he took, and I got off at Wantor, and he'd be two more stops. But I'm going through, and I'm getting old now too. But I'm like, I would have remembered seeing this guy, you know.
It's a big guy.
Yeah, because my wife's like, did you ever take the train with this guy? I'm like, I took trains with a lot of people, and you know what? When I would go home, I would just mind my own business. I would just
No one
put
makes
the
eye
paper
contact on the
put the
train.
paper up. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, two things you don't do. You don't talk to me on the train. And you don't sit next to me on the
Yeah,
train. There are certain things Long Island is like, you give people dirty
very
looks
true.
like when they sit down next to you and there's like 10 empty chairs. You're like, really? So
Exactly.
yeah, we all know that. Ground zero for a lot of this stuff, and you mentioned it several times, is this Holiday Inn Express in Hopog. And you know what? Reading back in there might have been another little clue in there where the police were actually talking about the surveillance video of Megan walking away, and that there's basically she gets to a certain point that you can't be seen or you can't see anything on the surveillance tape, and we know that's the night that she disappears. And when you look back in retrospect, do you look back and say, there was something else that I should have maybe investigated a little harder or looked at certain things as in police work, there's always something you say, I wish I would have done that.
Yeah, so I at the time I really thought she would be around if she was a victim of a crime and she was dead. I thought her body would be in that area. It was it's very industrial over there, and there were since then buildings have been like put up there, but I walked all of that. Like there was just piles of dirt and trees and stuff. I'm like, I know she's here. Like this is where she is, because at that point no one's thinking, or maybe she's hurting over here, like who knows, because maybe she got lost at night. If she was walking out they said she was probably going to the store and there's a gas station right there. Maybe she took
Yeah.
a wrong turn or something. I was sure like she's somewhere over here, never considering she'd be somewhere else. And the one thing that I always thought about, though, there's a parking lot. There's a back parking lot. It's in the front, but it's separate. I don't think cameras even hit over there. I don't know if police have surveillance from there, but they see her walking away. She's walking towards that parking lot. That is a perfect spot to not be seen. So he could have
Right.
said, "I'll meet you there," or picked her up over there, because you're away from the hotel at that point. It's a hotel parking lot, but it's its own thing. It's totally separate, and runs alongside the LIE.
Right. Which brings up the point now, once we hear about his document, right? His HK, you know, 2002 to 2004, which to me means that there's other years that they either got and they didn't tell us or they couldn't recover them. But learning about him, and the reason why I brought this up, because not too many people talk about that night in the surveillance video. But we do know he was very observant about where surveillance cameras were and what was going on. So if he picks her up in the back there that night, which probably looks like he did, he knew that those cameras weren't going to catch
Yeah,
him.
exactly. And there's even signs in that parking lot like this. This is basically saying this is a high crime parking lot. We are not responsible for stolen items. Basically saying like we're not watching this lot. Like if you're going to park back here, no one else is going to see anything. So I mean, it is an obvious place to go if you don't want to be seen.
Yeah, which is unfortunate too, because they kind of were benefiting from the style of work that was going on, providing that kind of service, and this is what you get, kind of thing.
Yeah. And you see that like the people coming in for weddings and stuff. You see, it's not like this is like the no-tell motel exactly either.
Yeah.
But it's off the LIE. It's an industrial area, so of course, like,
Yeah. I mean,
I would think, it seems like a decent hotel.
and as a kid growing up, you know where all those no-tell motels are, because that's
Yes,
where everyone,
exactly.
there's always the chatter. Like I remember the big one was the Sayonara on 110
Yes,
in
yes,
Amityville. The Sayonara, and when you're a teenager, right, you hear about these things because
yes.
you hear these stories. But and you kind of say to yourself, no one, like, because we lived on Long Island, you know where all these places were, and how he lives in Massapequa, you got to say to yourself, this guy was around all those kind of joints.
Definitely. I mean, he definitely knew the lay of the land, because there's a
Well, like I
lot
said,
of,
growing up, I knew it. I wasn't
yeah,
going there, but I knew them. I knew
yeah,
where they were because
exactly.
it was a big,
Just knowing Manorville,
gossip stuff. Yeah.
like that's pretty hidden over there. I mean, unless you're studying maps, which maybe that's the case, but there's a lot of different areas.
Right. Well, the gun club we know is the tie-in to that
That's
area.
when I went there when I was covering Jessica Taylor before it was a serial killer case, and we knew anything about like that. I was just there because that's where she was found, and then you could hear the gunshots in the background. And now now that's like one of those things where you look back on, because it was just so creepy. You're in this area
Mhm.
where it's like off the beaten path. There's nobody there. There's garbage thrown on the ground, and then like no one's really around. There's houses, but they're spread out, and it's like you hear these gunshots in the background, and I'm just like, that is just really. There's an abandoned railroad track around there too, and to think like he was actually a member of that gun club. It's the same club.
Right. And in addition, when you're dealing with that, right? So this is the prime example of the kind of question I was asking before, right? When you're looking back and you hear about it, you say to yourself, wow, right? Because now you put two and two together. We know about his gun collection and we see all the pictures of him at the gun range. And you say to yourself, I was this close, right? When you think about it, you were this close to
Yeah.
breaking the story wide open.
Oh,
I mean, hindsight, of course, is 2020. But maybe
yeah.
one of those, an urge to say, well, let me go to this gun range, right? See what this is all
Yeah, who
about.
would think that anything is it was just a creepy thing, just hearing gunshots in the background in general is just, it's creepy.
The
Oh,
Comac Motor Inn,
back
there's
to it
another one. Yeah,
again.
Kathy's giving us all the other. Yeah, I mean, we could just start
Oh,
listing them.
yeah.
The Beth Page one, which I think was actually in your story too. The Beth
Yes,
Page
I
one,
think
because
that
I,
that
I
was
I grew up on the mean streets of Levittown, and and everyone knew about the Beth Page motel there.
yeah.
I mean, I worked in the movie theater, which was right around the corner from it, right.
Oh,
Right. Remember there was the Mid Island Theater. It was this huge theater, and then there was the cemetery, and then it was the motel. And lots of stories coming out of that joint. But and when you start reading about these cases years later, and you see the connections. I mean, I was just a kid when that was stuff
yeah,
was going on, but to have this guy running around your neighborhood, basically, it's kind of
exactly.
spooky when when you think about it.
Yeah, it's like stuff that's not supposed to happen in real life, that's supposed to be like something people make up and you watch on TV, but not to real people. And
Do you think that there's been any redemption, let's say for the police or even the public about how we learn and deal with these cases now that when we have sex workers that go missing? Do you think there's any redemption?
I do. I hope people, because I always felt that way. I mean, I come from a police family, so I know the good side of things. So when people say, "Oh, they don't care," I know people who care personally. So I can't say, I do think, I know there's reasons when they hold back information. Doesn't mean they're not doing anything. There's of course cases that, yeah, where people don't do anything, but we don't know. And so I do try to give the benefit of the doubt, like, they are working on it, and I do think that, I mean, obviously you had the people like Burke and Spoda and people who were crooked and were very, bad people and doing bad things, but they were also good people. And, a few of those bad people don't represent everybody. It's not like cops don't care about sex workers. It's those cops did not care about sex workers, but I bet many
And
did.
apparently we had some people in the upper echelons too that didn't, and that
Exactly.
presented the bigger problem because you get your orders from above. It's a top-down organization,
Exactly.
so if they're not interested, well, neither am I.
Exactly.
And that's
Exactly.
something. And I think there's been a sea change, specifically in Suffolk. We know that because I mean to see how
Yeah.
this case did a complete 180. And if people want to argue with me, let's go. Come, I'll give you a link to a show. We can come up and we can argue all day long. I'll take you on, no problem. Black Whiter, thank you for becoming a member again. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. When so just recently we had some other big news. We had Sandra Castilla, and you said you were working on some of that stuff. Now, is there something that you had in mind and discussed with Sandra?
Yes, that, I mean, that was a huge shock when that announcement came, that they were charging Rex with her murder, because
Yeah, me too.
Sandra was part of a trio of murdered women. And in 1993 and 1994, Rita Tangretti and Colleen McNamee were also murdered. And all three of these cases, including Sandra, were considered to be, um, they were all considered to be murdered by the same person. And that was because their bodies were displayed a certain way. They were missing a shoe. They had wood chips near or around their bodies. So there were these things that made it seem like, okay, these three women were killed by the same person. And the DNA was found on Colleen and Rita, and that was connected to John Bitroff, which his name has come up a lot. And people thought maybe he was responsible for Gilgo. He was arrested in, I believe, 2014 for these murders because his DNA was found on their bodies, but not Sandra. But he was a suspect in Sandra's case. So he always said he was innocent. He said, I had sex with prostitutes. Like, I had sex with sex workers. That was something I did. And that's why my DNA is there. And he was convicted and he's been in prison for that. But now we have Rex being charged with Sandra's murder. And if he's charged with Sandra's murder, that is just those are very similar ways for those women to be displayed, to have a shoe missing, to have these wood chips around them. I feel like we have to ask now, like, look into those other two again. And a lot of people were against the way they connected the DNA to John Bitroff. So they found multiple DNA on
multiple
bodies.
donors.
So,
Multiple donors.
So that could just be as a result of them being sex workers. And I never really believed. I was like, okay, this guy's just, of course he's saying he's innocent. I didn't do it. But this is a very good reason to relook at those cases. And I'm sure the police said, I think one of the reporters asked a question at one of the press conferences, are you relooking at these cases? And I believe they said no, or the DA said no. But I'm sure they are behind the scenes. It's just like one of those things we're not going to tell you, but they have to be.
Well, specifically when this was all happening, who was in charge back then too?
Exactly.
That adds a whole other layer. I mean, when your district attorney goes to federal prison and all these other things, you just kind of like, raise the flag and go, and okay, guys, take a look at this. I don't think I'm going to say it first, Jaclyn. I'm not going to put you on the spot, but we haven't heard the last of John Bitroff. We haven't heard the last of this.
No.
And you agree?
Yes, because Spoda actually said this is the miracle of DNA is convicting him. He was in charge then. So.
And the prosecutor, I forget, he is an Italian guy. Was it Biancalava? I think his name was. And he said that he had mentioned that that Bitroff could be included as a possible suspect for Gilgo. And
exactly.
That caused a huge storm. Meanwhile, that could have been further from the truth right now because DNA has told us otherwise. And
exactly.
I think his name is going to come up in the trial. His
Definitely.
name's going to come up in the trial. I think the defense is going to be bringing it up for sure.
Yes.
Because of the whole, that's going to be their reasonable doubt. It wasn't my guy. It was this guy. You thought it was this guy all along.
Exactly.
And it becomes that becomes the red herring or the hair in the ointment for the district attorney in Lee Sandra's case.
Yes. And it also connects, not to bring this back, because I know the police have discounted this publicly, at least, with the women that were found in Atlantic City. Mm-hmm. They were also positioned a certain way, and it was like a ritualistic thing. And we now know that Rex has traveled in different areas and stuff. It wouldn't be shocking if they looked at that again. Not to say he did that, but there are definitely similarities, a lot of similarities, and it could that could come up.
Well, and I think it can come up or will come up once he gets, or if he gets convicted, because then his DNA is going to go into the CODIS database for everybody to get a crack out of it. Because New York, in its inimitable style, refuses to take it upon arrest, which makes me absolutely nuts. Even though the Supreme Court says, yes, you can do it, the New York State is still fighting this. So it's gotten to a point where you say to yourself, guys, we have a potential serial killer on our hands who could have potentially been working in other states. What are we doing here?
Yeah, that I didn't even think of that angle, because who knows what could come up out of that.
Yeah, well, I think there was also too that if something comes up a little too soon, then we can maybe talk about a federal nexus and then a takeover of the case too. So the district attorney's not really pushing that angle, but he's ready to go. Do you have any guess when this trial is going to take place? Because today was still another Fry hearing. We're still waiting on the judge to tell us if there's going to be separate cases, if the DNA is going to be allowed. Because today, I don't know if you heard it, but the defense witness said that the DNA that was used is flawed.
Yeah, I would like to hear the arguments for it now, and that was just coming up, because even if it's flawed, there's so many other things pointing to, I mean, I'm not an expert on DNA, but I can't imagine that. I really think they have their guy. Like, I hope with it. I mean, I'm all the evidence points. It's not just the DNA, you know.
Right. Well, listen, there's 400 electronic devices. That's all we heard. We don't know what's on them. We don't know if there's photos, phone numbers. I mean, geez, the amount of electronic evidence.
Exactly.
This is going to be a record, I think. And unfortunately, I don't think we're going to have cameras in the courtrooms, but
Yeah.
this would be one textbook example, because one thing I like about the district attorney is he's pretty much does things by the book. And I think he's going to lay this case out just like that. Like, here's the book, beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah.
You come up with another excuse why this guy's not, involved in it.
And then also going back to Bitroff, in one of the documents the police released, that Rex Heuermann was Googling John Bitroff.
Yeah, and it was in his neighborhood, basically.
Yeah,
Which
it's
is a whole other thing, like the psychology behind that, right? Because he's reading about this guy. He's allegedly left Sandra's body like in this guy's backyard. Um, yeah, talk this. When this is all said and done, we're going to find out that this guy is maybe one of the most prolific serial killers that this country has ever seen.
yeah. You hope. I mean, you hope there's like one person responsible, because you don't want to think there's a million people, a million, but a handful, any more than one person out on Long Island doing these horrible things. So, you know, I would love if it was just him and he was put away, and that, if that's what happened, because you just don't want to think there's like that many sick people out there.
Right, but
Or
technically, I think
capable.
we have like four operating at the same time, right? Joel Rifkin, Robert Schulman,
Oh,
Rex Sherman, and John Bitroff. And was it 1994? They were all active during, which is like, Long Island's big, but it's not that big. you know,
exactly. You don't want to think anybody's like, like there's anybody like that in the world, and it's just it's really
Craziness. It's
disgusting. Like,
craziness, and I've spoke to other Long Islanders, and they just some just cannot comprehend the extent of this case and the amount of evidence. I mean, we're talking storage facilities we still don't know about. We don't know what they found in the house, which initially I was wrong when I thought that there was no way that this happened in the house, especially with neighbors in on Long Island, right? They are everybody's business. Like, how do you not see something like this guy bringing home young girls? But then when you're hearing about and you're reading his document, they might have been unconscious. They might have been backing up that truck, take him right into the garage. No one
yeah,
would ever know.
exactly. And it was shocking to me just to know that Megan's phone was traced to that house, because as far as I knew, all of her belongings were left in the hotel room. I didn't think she had her phone with her. So that was something that was held back also. And so there's so many things, like we get little pieces, but there's so much more that we don't know.
Oh my
So
God.
who knows what's going to come out of things? And not to be dramatic or anything. I just, if this is what we're finding out, this is what they're releasing to the public, you just know there's so much more that we
Oh,
just don't know yet.
specifically bringing the medical examiner to a storage facility, you're calling him to the scene afterwards. And then, the district attorney saying there was a significant amount of evidence, trace evidence he took about from the house.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
This trial probably will not happen for a year or so at least, but there's going to be more that comes out before, and maybe it is a benefit that it doesn't happen right away, because they'll find out more, and there will be more victims who might be able to get justice, because a lot of times they'll convict somebody on one and they're in forever, but it would be nice for all of these women to be named and like and him charged and proven, just so all the families, not to get closure, but just to have like answers.
right. Yeah, no, I think closure is a term that we kind of use a lot, but it really, for the families, I don't think they ever get any closure. In regards to Peaches, then, when that was the other big news that came out in the last couple of months, I'm really high on that case still getting solved. And I've said this before, but I'm just going to tell you why, and I want to get your take on it. I said because it was in that Rubbermaid container, the blanket, and the pillowcase, and all, and tape. There's a good chance, because we've seen the other cases, other hairs or follicles or anything else contained in there. You know, they've kept the, lack of a better pun, right? They kept the lid on what was actually found in that Rubbermaid case, but I think the police are holding back
Yeah.
some special information on that.
If there's, we never knew there was any type of DNA. We didn't know there was a hair found on Jessica Taylor.
Right.
Like none of these things were known. So I can't imagine with the amount of, like you said, like the tape and the comfort that was in there, the pillowcase, that there's nothing in there. And I mean, that was amazing that they, like, that's what I really like. I love that they're still looking at, even whether they think these are connected or not. It's not about just like nailing Rex Human, it's about like actually figuring out what happened to these women, who did it. And Peaches was one of those cases where it's just like they're not going to solve it. It was on America's Most Wanted, I believe. Like it was on
Yeah.
TV. They found the tattoo artist and no one knew her name. And it was just, this is incredible.
Yeah, no, and one of we call them the squad members over here. Our squad in the chat had asked me a question, and I said, "Wow, I never thought of that." The belt with the initials on it,
The
like,
belts.
here's where Peacock could have really made a big thing. It says the belt. Do you recognize that? Right? And I forgot who that was. If you're in the room today, come out and tell us. 'Cause I thought that was I totally didn't think about that, but I thought that was a great observation by one of our members.
Yeah, the WH.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that was one of the first things, like going back to the belt. Like they never told us about the belt until later, but WH and his grandfather's name is William Huerman. I
Right,
mean,
but asking Asa, was that belt in the house?
oh
I mean,
yeah,
because there was another one, right? There was another belt that had that part cut off that they found.
oh I did not know that.
Oh yeah, what one of the other belts was found. I don't know if it was on Maureen Brainerd Barnes or one of the other Gilgo four, but they had a belt that top was cut off where those initials would have been. So there's
Wow,
potentially two that had those initials on
wow,
on the thing, which was yeah, no, like I said, we're just learning uh little by little, but I think you start putting things together, and as a reporter, you do this for a living, and you see, and this is what I used to do, right? You get these little bits and pieces, then you start drawing conclusions, and it's pretty interesting. Uh, this was Sheila says, will the cases be tried together or will they separate them? We're waiting to find out. The defense wants that and of course the prosecution is trying to put up a fight or a motion to defeat that. I think ultimately the judge is going to say no, all these cases are going together, but I don't know. Right? Anything could happen in regards to that. Just we have only a few minutes left, Jaclyn. Do you think there's going to be any big surprises coming up, like any other shocking things like we saw the Sandra Castilla? I think was a huge shocker, and I think look, the identity of Peaches was not a shocker to me because for a year I've been saying they knew who she was.
oh,
Uh, yeah,
and they had, right?
yeah, and they
Like,
have,
they
yeah,
did.
and the only reason why I thought that is because of the fact that had put out the Facebook post by accident in Mobile, Alabama, searching for the
Oh,
family.
oh,
So
yeah,
you kind of, like I said, you put these things, you start putting
yeah.
two and two together, and you get four. But do you think there's going to be another big shocker coming in this case in the next, let's just say 6 months? This is total guess, right? We're not going to hold you
I'm
to it.
yes, just
Yeah, me too.
not because just because everything has been a shocker. Like I think it was a shocker when that 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 child was Peach's child, like before she was identified. Because when I interviewed the detective on that case, he said somewhere out there this woman has a child, and that child's growing up without their mother because she had a C-section scar. So I always had that in
Mm,
my mind. There's this child out there who's going to get curious about where their mother is, and to know that that child died where at the same time as their mother is just a whole other kind of like a sick feeling of like that child was never had a chance. And it's just like there's so many things that just like make your stomach just drop in this,
yeah,
and there's so many just shocking things, and I just can't imagine it stops here just from what
right.
we've seen.
And Flynn Brown brings up Asian Doe,
Yes.
which we do know. Well, maybe you might not know, but maybe you do from one of my friends, Gisela, who runs Grizzly True Crime. She's a very popular channel on here. She's got like a 500,000 subscribers. I mean, she's huge. She had put out the information about Asian male doe and says, let's see if we can find this guy. And Othram wrote, "It's only a matter of time" on the tweet. So I thought that was kind of interesting, like saying, "Wow, are they working on this?" Because we know they were working on these cases. So I mean, that would be a big deal too, finding out who Asian male doe
Amazing.
is.
And it's just interesting because like now we see things he has searched where he was looking for like small Asian men with like feminine characteristics.
Yep.
And this fits. Like it's not like, just trying to connect things and make it fit. It's like these things really fit. Like you don't have to dig very far. There's so many things that point, and I know that was another thing, like, oh, he was killed differently, that person. But if this person was transgender, if he thought this person was a woman and found out he was a man, there's all different reasons for things. So
Yeah, because he had his head. I think he had a damage to his skull.
yeah, it was like a
So
very violent, like
violent. Yeah.
rage filled, is how I
Right. A
think
lot
how
of
they
anger. Yeah. There was
described
even.
it.
Yeah. Even there was rumor at the time. I don't even know if there was a gunshot, whatever. But That's not neither here nor there. But we do know that he had some trauma. Some blunt force trauma to his head. So I mean, there's a lot of anger there. I mean, listen, there's a lot of things going on, but I still think there are other cases that could be attributed to him that aren't even included in what we
Yeah,
already know. Because, like I said,
exactly.
Sandra Castillo just came steaming out of left field.
Yeah, and so many people, like, they're catching up with like NamUs, like the database, and with different cases that weren't put back in the 80s. They're still filling that stuff in. So like I saw new cases be added from like the 70s in December. So who knows? There's things we don't know about that had
Yep.
happened a long time ago. So who knows?
Is there the last minute or so, Jaclyn? Is there anything that you'd like to tell the audience that you're working on, or besides your website, is there anything else that you want people to go to learn about what you write about, and do?
Not for me.
You're
I
very humble. We love it.
no, I don't have anybody. I mean, honestly, this I kind of fell into this story. It was more of like I was so angry about it and upset that I felt like I had to do something. So I really just hope people, you know, pay. Like I think it's easy when there's people you don't relate to. People are a different line of work. People have different lifestyles and stuff. And it's easy to say, like, I always say this, that it can't happen to me. You want to make yourself feel better, like, this will never happen to me because I don't do those things. And it's like a defense thing, and it's just, this could happen to anybody. And there's not that much difference between you and those women, and not everybody has had the same life experiences. And it's just, I appreciate when people appreciate that they're human too, and that they did not deserve this, and no, they were
It's
not asking for it. And that's my main thing, is like, I always just want to get that out there, is like,
excellent. And Jacqueline's official website is right there. I encourage you to go over to her website, read her stories, and see of all the different things that she's written about. Because she writes about a whole other things about human trafficking and things that we can talk about for hours. Maybe one day we can have you back on. We could talk about some other things. But if there's other big breaking news down the road, Jacqueline, we would love to have you back, because the audience loves you too. It says we love you, Jacqueline. Great reporter. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for all
thank
the
you so
work you did
much.
on this.
I really, really appreciate that.
So, yep, we'd love to have you back. And I want to thank you for your time tonight. It was good speaking with you again, Jacqueline.
You too. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you, everyone.
Jacqueline, you hang out 1 second. We're going to
Yes.
end it, guys. Good night. We'll see you soon. This Saturday, I have a premiere. Boy in the Box, the longest homicide investigation in Philadelphia. Saturday at 12 p.m. It's going to be a 3-part series, so make sure you tune in. Everybody have a great night. Bye now.